Well, good morning and welcome to the MAVS 3 Citizens Advisory Board meeting of June the 28th, 2012. We will call the meeting to order. Amanda, do we have a quorum? Do we have a quorum?
Yes.
I love legal advice. Thank you. You have been provided with copies in your packet of the minutes of the May the 24th, 2012 board meeting. Are there additions or corrections? If none, shall we approve them?
I move that we accept the minutes as written.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve the minutes of our previous meeting. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The minutes are approved. Item 3 on our agenda is the election of a vice chairperson of the MAVS 3 Citizens Advisory Board. And just a couple of preliminary comments. I want to begin by saying thank you to Zane and to Michael Adams. As you all know, as we noted last time, Nathaniel's going to be away on active duty for a period of time, and Zane is stepping into the chairmanship of the Modern Transit Streetcar Committee, and Michael has taken on the additional responsibility. In addition to what the other things he's doing, he's agreed to be the vice chair of that committee during Nathaniel's absence. And I wanted to say a word of personal thanks to you guys for stepping in the breach, and I know that Nathaniel will appreciate it. Second point I want to make is that our vice chair, who has been serving, is Rusty LaForge. And Rusty has submitted his resignation for reasons that we have previously outlined, that he has taken on a new position in his career, and he has a conflict in the meeting times. He did not wasn't anxious to resign, but had to because he could not make the meetings. You'll be interested to know that he has been appointed to the Park Committee and attended their meeting yesterday for the first time, so Rusty will still be engaged in the process. And I think we're all glad about that. And he's already busily engaged. That brings us to the point that we need to elect a vice chairperson. The ordinance, I believe, provides that we shall do so annually. You'll recall that that Rusty was elected before. I am asking you all to consider the method that we go forward with this. We can, of course, under Robert's Rules of Order, take nominations and select any one of our members. There is also a school of thought that it might be a good thing if we could agree on some kind of a rotational system that would give everyone on the board the chance to act as the vice chairman on a rotating basis. We could do that. It's not available for us to do it by seniority since we all started at the same time. But we could do it by wards. We could, in any manner we wanted to. We would have to, of course, still nominate, vote on, and elect the vice chair. But we could agree on a system that would provide a way of doing that each year so that we did not have to revisit the issue or have a competition, if you will, each year for this. I throw that out just for your comment and thought, and wondered if any of you all have any thoughts about it.
Mr. Chairman, just a comment. The City Council uses a rotation system for vice mayor, and so it's not uncommon to do that kind of a practice in the city level. So,
thank you, Councilman.
I might say, as being one of the advisory board members that was actually nominated in the voting process last year, that I love the fact of looking at the wards on a rotational basis, because it does give every single person that sits on this board a chance to be vice chairman and hold that position as well. And I think it helps for a more amiable and non-combative relationship, although I believe that all of us have gotten to be really good friends and work together. So I would certainly be for that.
Any other comments? Couple of points to consider as we decide how to do this. Then we would presumably start with Ward 1, 2, 3, and down the line. And we need to take into consideration that Dee Morales should be afforded an opportunity to serve as vice chair, and she is an at-large member, so we could either go around the horseshoe, or we could do it in some manner where she served either first or last, in whichever way we want to do that, but it should be inclusive of her. Councilman, I guess I would wonder whether or not it is thought that a member of the city council would want to serve as vice chair. I mean, should we include the city council member in that process?
Since the city council member rotates periodically, I think it's probably a good idea not to include them, because you get somebody who maybe would be brand new to the committee and is a brand new as a brand new vice chairman, and that might be not in the best interest of the committee going forward.
Something else I may throw out there for consideration is that not everyone may be comfortable serving as vice chairman. Certainly, from time to time, you hear people going, oh, I would rather not have to have that responsibility. So possibly in looking at not only the rotation, but if it came to that ward representative's term for being vice chairman, and they felt uncomfortable do it, that they would then maybe have the opportunity to pass to the next person in line.
Well, any other comments?
Just one, I have a question for Amanda. Is this something that we would require a motion on to establish the procedure for, it's not electing, but selecting the electee? Is this something that needs a motion to establish as a procedure?
What you're doing is setting a policy of the board. So you could do a motion to set this as a policy, but each year you would need to confirm the person who is to be provided, and that would allow you the opportunity for the person to decline the position as a vice chairperson.
Thank you.
Then shall we adopt this as a policy?
Yes, I can.
Someone want to make a motion to do that?
I move the item.
I second.
Motion's been made and seconded that we adopt as a policy a rotational system for the vice chair position, and that it be done by wards starting numerically with 1. Are we agreed? And that we include the at-large member. How should we do that?
Well, my recommendation is not to do that, but it's...
I'm sorry, go ahead. I'm not talking about you, I'm talking about Dee Morales.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Kim? We're discussing this.
Since today we do need to elect or appoint a new vice chairperson, and our Ward 1 representative isn't here to confirm her appointment, possibly we should consider starting with Dee, as she's our member at large.
It was my understanding that I'm appointed. I get a letter every year from the mayor asking me to come and sit again. He may change his mind down the way.
But someone would be in the seat.
Right.
But we know you're here now.
Yeah, I'm here now.
But would you be willing to serve if you were elected today?
Yes, certainly. Sure.
Well, that would solve our problem. We could start with the at-large member and then go by wards 1, 2, so forth. Is that sufficiently clear in the motion?
That's what I meant to say.
Yeah. Have we got this sufficiently on the record, Amanda?
So for point of clarification for the record, your motion is that the vice chairperson be selected each year based upon wards, starting with the at-large first, then going 1 through 8, and that confirmation will be done every year.
That's our motion.
Okay.
Whoever made the second, do you agree with that motion? All right. Is there further discussion? As many as favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The policy then is adopted. That leads us then to the action item for the election of the vice chairperson for the ensuing year. Zane?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we elect Dee Morales as the vice chair for the next year.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Are there other nominations? Further discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Congratulations on your elevation to this office. Democracy in action. Item 4 is we're to consider the MAVS 3 revenue and expenditure report. Eric, would you present that for us?
I'd be happy to, Mr. Chairman. This is for the report ending April 30th, 2012. Similar format that you've seen in previous months. I think you'll see the figures continue to increase for the collections of the sales tax. We're now at $187 million, and that does include interest as well. A couple other points that typically get asked on previous months. If we compare this to the original $777 million projection, we are about 2.9% over that original target. That equates to about $5.2 million over the 777. So I know we're still early in the program, but if we look at it on a month-by-month basis, the sales tax performance is very good. The figures that you actually have in your report are based on fiscal year targets, and so those will change each fiscal year. So the percentages for those, when we look at it as a April target, so this would be the month ending April, the April target was 10% above target, and if we look at the to date, it's about 4.3%. So we continue to make annual adjustments based on economic conditions, but I know that we're asked periodically, how does it compare to the original 777? So all indications are very good.
Any questions?
I have no questions or comments and would move that we accept the report.
I'll second that.
Motion's been made and seconded that we accept the revenue and expenditure report. All in favor say aye. Opposed, no. It is received. Item 5, we have a resolution regarding our consultant services contract with ADG. Eric, do you want to present that for us?
Yes, I would. As you recall, we entered into a contract with ADG in June of 2011 to begin program consulting services, and it was anticipated at that time that it would be annually renewed. It would include additional scope of work enhancements. It might include additional fees, but it would be an annual renewal. And so what you have today as agenda item number 5 is that annual renewal. It does not increase the fees at this time. It simply extends the period of performance from July 1st, 2012 to June 30th, 2013. But as a point of background, as we talk about the scope of work and what they've completed to date, we have authorized through contracts $2,655,000 worth of work, $2 million which has been spent. So there's about $570,000 remaining under the current authorization. We're anticipating sometime later in the year that we will come back with actually an amendment for fee. But today is just an amendment for the period of time. There's still ample fee in the contract for them to perform for several additional months. And one of the reasons that we do this is that we're only amending the contract for work that we believe is going to be required in the upcoming year. And some of that's still being outlined as we continue to approve project requirements, several of which are on today, as we look at plan reviews and some of the other things regarding schedule. So I can answer any questions that the board may have.
Same. Any questions? Well, I want to add just this comment. We, working with consultants is probably newer for most of us on the board than it is for the city staff. And I value your view about it. But I will just say, my observation is that they've been tremendously faithful, showing up at every meeting, being there, responding to every request. And while I'm not working with them every day, I just say that I certainly favor renewing their contract because they really, to my way of thinking, have done a great job in assisting us in this process.
With that said, I wish that Mike was here, but I'm sure Nicole can take the message back to him that I recommend or I move that we extend the contract for the next year for ADG on the A&E.
Is there a second? Motion's been made and seconded that we adopt the resolution renewing the consultant services contract with ADG. Further discussion? All in favor say aye. Opposed, no. The resolution is adopted. Item 6, we will now start on a series of recommended resolutions approving project requirements for the committees. Eric, you want to introduce that subject and our person who will be talking to us about it today?
I'd be happy to. We are obviously working towards completing the project requirements For the remaining projects in the MAP 3 program, and item 6 is the Convention Center project requirements. It was reviewed by the Convention Center subcommittee this month. There were some discussion items. There were a couple of minor changes that were recommended in some of the figures, specifically to the size of the ballroom, not putting in specifics about the size. There were some others about ceiling heights. And so there's been a few minor adjustments, but I would tell you that the document is presented to you today is complete, and it's ready for us to recommend its approval to the City Council, pending those recommendations made by the Convention Center subcommittee. We'd like to invite Nicole Franklin with ADG up to make some additional comments. This is one of the scope of services that ADG has provided in pulling these documents together, putting them into a format that can be utilized not only by the board, but by staff and then future architects and engineers that might be working on the project.
Exactly.
Go.
Good morning, board members, Eric, Councilman Ryan. Mike is out of town. As I mentioned, he's in D.C. today, so I'm here in his stead to just talk to you a little bit more about the project requirements that are on the table today. They are separate items on your agenda, so I'll go over them separately. We'll start with the Convention Center. They are both in your packet. I don't know if you want to turn to those pages or not, but again, as Eric mentioned, I'll remind you that they're guidelines for the architects and the engineers, and the other purpose really is to serve as summaries for this board and for the subcommittees. So the documents really inform both of those groups of people. The Convention Center draft is in your packet. It has been to the subcommittee a couple of times in draft form, and feedback has been provided by the subcommittee, by consultants, by Mike Carrier. We've incorporated all of that feedback. The main change, as Eric mentioned, in this final draft from maybe the original or earlier drafts is just that some language has either been added or changed to allow a bit more flexibility. The designers in this case will be able to provide, we need the best possible use and maximization of space, and so there's a little more flexibility in the language in this project. Just a couple of examples of that. On page 1, the last paragraph, particularly the last couple of sentences, really kind of speak to that sort of flexibility in language. On page 6 through 9, where the functional diagrams are, we added the word conceptual at the beginning of each of those descriptions. And again, as Eric mentioned, on page 10, the actual number of exhibit halls, it says, will be determined by the consultant, rather than we had previously sort of prescribed a number. And that's really something that the consultant will be deciding on. So as Eric mentioned, again, the subcommittee has forwarded to you this month this final draft with 2 amendments, and they are, as Eric said, the page 10 in the ballroom will be removing the specific ceiling height. 35 feet is an industry standard for exhibit hall space, not necessarily for ballroom space, and having that requirement might, set some constraints, unnecessary constraints in the design. And then on page 15, we will remove we've recommended a certain number of square feet. It's really more about proportional size between ballroom, exhibit space, and meeting rooms, so we've taken that requirement out and just allowed the designer to make those decisions. So I'm happy to answer questions, but again, today we come with this final draft to be approved with those 2 amendments.
Any questions? On behalf of the subcommittee, I'll just say that I would want to give you the comfort that it's been thoroughly vetted, that we have looked at it at more than one meeting. We have the valuable expertise of Mike Carrier, she mentioned, who is for those of you who don't know, is the executive director of the Oklahoma City Convention and Visitors Bureau and has been involved in projects like this. And he, I think, spent as much or more time as any other member of our committee, although other members provided comments. And it was thoroughly discussed, and it was approved unanimously by our subcommittee. So I come to join Nicole and Eric and staff in recommending this from our committee as well. Other questions?
I think what we would ask from staff's perspective is to make a motion accepting not just the document, but with the amendments as proposed.
Is there such a motion?
I'll make that motion.
Motion's been made. Is there a second? Motion's been made and seconded that we adopt the resolution approving the project requirements as amended. Further discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? It's unanimously adopted. Thank you. Nicole, if you'll stay there with us for a moment, we're ready then to move to item 7 on the Oklahoma River improvements. Eric, you want to start for us?
And I think similar to the Convention Center, these have been to the river on a couple of occasions, the River Subcommittee, similar discussions. And let the chairs and vice chairs speak to that. I think the only question that came up this week, and again, one of our local experts, Mike Knopp, has proposed an additional storage facility that has come under some question. It's not currently specific as a project in the river proposal, but it's something that I think that they desire to look further into the future. It's not decided whether it would occur earlier or later, but it is something that they'd like to make a proposal, I think, at a later time. But it definitely has some consideration where they want to bring that forward to you later. But the document's included, and I can let Nicole make any additional comments from ADG's perspective.
Thank you, Eric. Again, this final version has been in draft form to the subcommittee a couple of times. The primary change in the final draft from the original, and Mike Adams was astutely found some of these changes. This document is a little different than the others because the river project has several phases that are really separate projects within the umbrella of the river project. We have a separate section in the document for each phase, and there were some repetitive information about the site analysis that were showing up in each section. So we've consolidated that information. It's on page 3 now at the beginning of the document, and it's just in the document once rather than several times. Other than that, really that's the primary change that was made, so this document comes to you from the subcommittee just for approval as written with no amendments.
Dee, any comments from the committee or Mike? Anything else? All right.
I have one question, and that with the upcoming proposition of the new storage facility, is that something that's crucial to events that will be happening within the next few years at the river?
The storage, the starting equipment is sensitive and expensive, and so it has to be stored. It's only utilized like 3 times a year, I believe, at the present time. But we definitely don't want to ruin the equipment by not having adequate storage. So it was something we didn't know that if we could take out of this budget or in the next phase when we save money on some cameras or something else, that we could take it out of that. So it's an ongoing situation.
And that equipment's currently stored. They have a pod or a container that has been located on site, and so it's secured. It's just not a permanent facility. So the discussion is to have a permanent facility constructed. And I'm not sure that the exact size and shape and location has been determined. So I think it's still under a lot of discussion, but I think that that's a possibility of coming up at some point in the future. So that was just one of the major notes made.
Shall we approve this resolution? It's been moved that we approve the resolution. Is there a second? It's been seconded. As many as favor of the motion say aye. Opposed, no. The motion to recommend the resolution is adopted. Item 8.
Thank you.
Eric?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is the resolution approving the contract with Enercon Services for environmental engineering for the MAPS 3 Park. I think as we've described this previously, there's a lot of environmental investigation and study that's going to be required before we can actually do design and construction. Obviously, the majority of the lots have been acquired. There's a few remaining, and we'll talk about those in the informational items. But very similar to the way staff addressed the Bricktown area in MAPS 1, the contract before you follows a very similar form. You'll find if you look at it in detail, it's an hourly rate structure for engineering and technical services, that it also has specific rates for testing services. And it can be various tests, including asbestos, lead paint, different chemicals that you might find in the ground so that we can ascertain exactly what it is that's within the park. It's been negotiated at a fee of not to exceed $150,000. It would be done on a work order basis, so staff would issue work orders based on proposals from the engineer, but they would be in line with the scope of services in the project. There are a lot of unknowns, and so a contract like this is hard to negotiate in a lump sum. We'll look at parcels that we own. We'll send the engineer out to do specific borings and drillings and mapping and recommendations back to the advisory board. But something else that has an advantage to the city is that there's still some ongoing brownfields grants that are available. These are funds that are available outside of the city of Oklahoma City, but specifically can be used on the park. So there are other consulting services underway through the city's planning department that have already been initiated. When we talk about environmental reports, they come in series. Phase 1 reports. You're going to hear about Phase 1 assessments. You're going to hear about Phase 2 assessments. literally all the Phase 1 assessments that were completed were done outside of MAPS 3, but for the benefit of MAPS 3. Those were done under the Brownfields program. They've recently received approval to proceed with some Phase 2 assessments. But there's going to come a point where we're going to need the consulting services of Enercon to fill in those gaps and to put in reports, information for engineers and contractors to actually do abatement and construction, and that's really where this is tailored to go. This is to make sure that anything information-wise that we don't have, we can collect and move the project forward. So with that, the contract's been successfully negotiated, and I can answer any additional questions that you might have.
Any questions?
Just a comment, Mr. Chairman. I have some personal experience working in that area, and there are some interesting environmental challenges there, and I think this money would be well spent to identify those as quickly as we can so we can begin remediation, because some of the remediation efforts may be time-consuming, and so I think that the quicker we can get these people on site doing work, the better off we are.
Thank you, Councilman. Kim, this comes with a recommendation from your committee?
It did yesterday at our Park Subcommittee meeting. This contract was approved with one amendment to it that you will find on page 4 under item 2, basic services, under A, general, item 5. The original line reads to conduct asbestos surveys, lead paint assessments, and/or other environmental services required for demolition of buildings. As you well know, we have a historic building survey being done right now, and it has been the general consensus of the subcommittee that all buildings be viewed for repurpose or reuse and consideration for our architects. And so the addition of the words remediation or reuse following demolition of buildings, so that it will read at the latter half of the sentence that any other environmental services required for demolition, remediation, or reuse of buildings, so that it wouldn't preclude that all buildings that found something needing remediation would then be destroyed. So with that amendment, this contract was approved and moved to this board for their approval with that same amendment.
And so what's before us then, Eric, is the contract with the amendment that Kim mentioned.
Yes, we would recommend the amendment be included.
Right. Further discussion? Is there a motion to approve this contract?
I would so move.
Second? Been moved and seconded that we approve the contract with Enercon Services for the fee outlined. Further discussion? All in favor say aye. Opposed, no. It is adopted. Item 9, another contract for another resolution approving a contract. Eric, would you brief us on this?
Yes, this is the contract with Hargrave and Associates for the development of a master plan for the MAPS 3 downtown park. I think one of the things that we had been discussing for months is the coordinated efforts between the design services of the park, the convention center, the transit facilities. And this allows that park, which is also on the timeline, to move forward. And so this is that first assessment of actually determining what's going to occur in the park. It has several components that you'll find in the contract. Not only is it a master plan, but it also looks at the economics of a park. It looks at future use and some other categories of work, so it's not just design services. The contract itself is $1.2 million. It is that first phase of work, but as you recall, we're working towards an $80 million park on a construction budget. So as we look at it in comparison to typical fee proposals that we would normally receive on a project, it's in line with a project of this size. I mean, it's a very substantial amount of effort that's going to be put forth, both for the upper and the lower parks, and this is that master plan that's going to be used for future design contracts. So with that, I know staff is eager to proceed and can answer any questions that you might have.
Any questions for Eric about this?
Eric, does this, the services we're requesting here is that going to also address the substation?
You know, specifically, I think that it could come with recommendations regarding the substation. I think the subcommittee previously considered allowing it to remain and possibly do some screening opportunities on that. The actual design for the screenings and things like that would come later, but from a master planning perspective, I would conceive that it would possibly address that. I mean, that's an all-inclusive master plan. So this would be those visionary drawings, those things that we would expect to find once the entire park project was complete.
Kim?
I just have a few comments. Obviously, this yesterday was at the Park Subcommittee, and one of the first things that I would like to recognize is all the work that the MAPS 3 program staff, especially David Todd, Wayne Corville, and Amanda Carpenter, have put in putting this contract together. There's a tremendous amount of information, a lot of line items, and umpteen hours that have gone into it from each one, and we are very appreciative of the work. The subcommittee passed it unanimously, and we are very excited to begin on this. And also, just to remind back, Michael, on your question, when the parks wrote the park requirements, we took the request of the City Council to come up with considerations on how to propose screening the substation and put that into our park requirements so that this master plan would then have to reflect ideas to do that, and then, of course, meet the City Council's approval for those submissions and ideas.
Further comments or questions? All right. Shall we adopt this resolution approving the contract, this recommendation?
I would move so.
It's been moved and seconded that we recommend the resolution approving the contract with Hargraves. As many as favor the motion say aye. Opposed, no. It is adopted. Item 10. Eric?
Yes, we would actually request that this item be stricken from the agenda today during the subcommittee meetings this week, and you'll find that there's actually two preliminary reports. The trail was broken into two sections. There were some questions on the routing of this particular trail for the West River connection, and so we'd like to bring that to you at a future meeting. So the request is to strike that from the agenda today.
The subcommittee concurs with that.
Thank you, Zane. Any objection to having that stricken? All right. Then let's move to item 11, also from the Mass 3 Trails Subcommittee.
We do have a preliminary report for you this morning. We want to invite Curtis Brown up to the podium to make that report to you, and of course he can answer any questions that you have. This is the second part of the initial work that we started with the West River Trail System, and so there has been a presentation also made to the subcommittee, which is the same one that you're going to receive today.
Okay. Thank you. Pleased to be here this morning and discuss our preliminary report. I'll try to be very brief as we go through. Okay. Sorry. Thank you. Our trail alignment from the onset has been fairly stable. It starts at Council Road, runs along the north side of the river, to the west about a mile, and then it turns to the north where it's continuing along on the east side of the river. Comes in, we have one place where we're near some industrial property near I-40, cross underneath those bridges, and then continue on up around the landfill and on all the way up to 10th Street. And I want to kind of walk through this in a little bit more detail as we go through. Here, starting at Council Road, the trail alignment runs along an old abandoned roadway. What we have shown on the exhibit here in front of you is a suggested right-of-way takes, which is fairly significant in this section, but comes from the edge of the industrial property to the meander line of the river. We're discussing that with staff and some others and ways to reduce some of that, but we wanted to propose a very conservative approach in our estimates and what the right-of-way takes were. The grades in this area are very stable and flat and be very nice. As we continue on to the west, we're working around a sand and gravel industry here, and this is one section where we're suggesting doing some fencing. We have proposed about a 6-foot chain link fence that's black vinyl coated. We're suggesting that because the black actually kind of disappears visibly. It kind of looks like a shadow and you see through it, so it's not a visual eyesore, but it will be substantial enough that it will keep that heavy industrial activity from going on the trail. This is also a main entrance point for a lot of motorcycle and ATV traffic all throughout this section of the trail, and also help isolate and keep this very pedestrian-friendly and as people relearn some recreation habits in this area. So this trail through the sand and gravel area, again, follows the top shelf, very good area along the river, and continues on north, where we have actually a decent right-of-way acquisition in the Peterbilt dealership lot. We're actually having to take a portion of their lot, their parking lot, in order to construct this trail, and that is because of a very significant drop along the edge of the trails, about 50 feet or so straight down. We're seeing that embankment continue to erode, and so we needed to move the trail back far enough to preserve that investment, and that's what dictated us going into that property. That also gives us the ability and the grades to be able to start going down underneath I-40. It's a fairly steep drop to get down underneath I-40, and we'll be going down underneath there and crossing under I-40. After we cross under I-40, pop back up, run along the back against some properties there, heading up toward Reno, and then we cross underneath the Reno Bridge and get up onto the abandoned landfill. This is the end of the real right-of-way purchases. Once we get onto this area, we're looking at doing an easement, so that's why the exhibit shows a much narrower corridor for our trail, just enough to construct it. We'll continue along the completed landfill along the west side. I'd like to mention that in our briefings, we are doing a parking lot in this area. That's not laid out yet, but that'll provide a nice midpoint trailhead for users to access this. Our section of trail is very difficult to get to and access just by its location, so this will provide a nice place to do that. And we're also looking at some lighting and blue phones as well to provide some safety, as well as the emergency and pedestrian access here. We'll be continuing on north, following the trail right along the top shelf. Once we get above the old railroad right-of-way, we get onto Oklahoma City property for the rest of our trail section. So there is no acquisition needed here in this north half. And just following the trail, running a little bit east and north, following a OG&E easement right along the section line road as we continue north. And then with this one, actually north is to the right instead of up. But we'll continue following that OG&E easement all the way up to Northwest 10th Street. At Northwest 10th Street, we will have a pedestrian crossing, a signalized crossing, where it'll be a push-button activated. Lights will turn red to stop traffic on 10th Street and allow cyclists, pedestrians to cross 10th Street with a higher degree of safety. We have a little bit of utility coordination, some intersection improvements to do in this area, but it's fairly routine just to work on the geometry to come through. I'd like to talk, we also have one more parking lot we're building here at 10th Street. There'll be a small parking lot again for access and emergency and use access. The retaining walls under 10th Street, just very briefly, fairly substantial. We have a top shelf one that'll just kind of hold debris and soil and rain from coming onto the trail from underneath I-40, but then a much more substantial one on the river side of the trail that looks like what you see here before you. Kind of looking at it in cross-section, you'll kind of see we're building a shelf underneath the I-40 for our trail to work on, as opposed to cutting into the embankment to create a shelf. We need to actually build an embankment in order to not undercut the I-40 bridge structures, so that's what this does. And the material we're using to build that retaining wall is a very nice stacked rock. It's actually a precast concrete that looks like a sandstone. It's colored, has a multiple texture and colors to it that are very compatible to the other colors and stones on the rest of the river trail system, and should be a very pleasing and fairly difficult for vandalism and graffiti because of the texture and the style to help kind of discourage some of that. Very briefly, we're in good shape with our alignment where we're at. We've started the coordination now since the plans are fairly well settled in alignment with both FEMA, Army Corps of Engineers, and ODOT, primarily concerning the I-40 crossing, but also just our trail is in the floodplain, and just with that coordination. They're in receipt of all of our work, but no comments have been received yet, but that's ongoing. Should you and the council approve our preliminary report, we'll immediately get into finalizing the right-of-way acquisition and those exhibits with staff, and then pressing on with good measure with the final design on the trail and those amenities. And with that, I open up to any questions or comments. Yes, ma'am.
What about lighting and safety at night? Will it be available to the public at night? Is there any hours or?
Yeah, currently we do not have any trail lighting on our project. The parking lot areas, we were going to be doing some, we're planning on actually solar area lighting, solar-powered area lighting for that area, but we don't have anything elsewhere along the trail at this time.
Okay, thank you.
I don't, from the overall project perspective, we didn't really request any lighting. We have had discussions on mile markers and emergency access and emergency phones, the possibility of that in the future, but right now that's not specifically called out.
Further questions?
I move that we accept the preliminary report for the MAP 3 Trail Phase 1 West River connection from South Council Road to Northwest 10th Street.
It's been moved and seconded that we recommend the resolution approving this report. Further discussion? All in favor say aye. Opposed, no. It's adopted. Item 12. Eric?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a resolution ratifying the issuance of addendum and the award of contract for the Racecourse River Lighting System. I think you recall several months ago we did receive bids on this. It was over budget, and we rejected those bids and re-advertised. And so the engineering firm Garber Engineers, revised those drawings. They clarified some of the contractor questions, and we'd be happy to report that about $250,000 was saved in the rebid. What you have before you is a recommendation for a contract with Wind Construction Company in the amount of $3,051,371, or $370, excuse me. It includes the base bid, which is a 500-meter lighting system. It also includes upgrading some of the lighting near the finish line to 70-foot candles, which was a request of the subcommittee. It has a 40-foot candle upgrade in lighting from the 200-meter to the 500-meter mark. It also includes some additional controls. And I think a couple of the other questions that had come up, and these were included in the base bid, is we are going to be able to set those poles back away from the river's edge to improve the sight lines of the boathouses that are being constructed. And then the poles are also of a heavy-duty nature so that if they want to be further upgraded in the future, they can. So if the river would like to, or the river promoters would like to hang additional lights on these poles, there is that possibility. So I'd tell you that it was a very successful rebid. We did have several interested bidders that you'll find a bid tab on the second page of your memo. There were 3 companies that bid the project, and we're recommending approval.
Questions for Eric? Dee, do we have the recommendation of your subcommittee for this?
We did. We went over this very thoroughly. My compliments to the members of the subcommittee and to the staff for pursuing this and getting us a big savings. That's great.
Further discussion? Want to move approval? And it's been moved and seconded. We approve this resolution ratifying the issuance and approving the item on the Oklahoma River Racecourse lighting improvements. If you're in favor, say aye. Opposed, no. We have approved it. Item unlucky 13, Eric.
It's going to be a lucky 13 today.
All right, perfect. Go ahead.
Lucky 13. So this is a companion item to number 12, and I think again probably in the last year we've talked about a participation agreement with OG&E to support the river lighting program. The infrastructure for these lights is very significant. It's not a household current when we talk about electricity that we're seeking down there. It's a tremendous amount of power to actually power up these lights for 500 meters. This item is the agreement, and you'll find that it has been reduced to the amount of $442,000. You might recall some of the previous numbers were approaching $500,000 and $600,000 for this agreement. So MAP staff, along with several other parties, worked very hard to get that fee as low as possible. But this is an agreement directly with OG&E to have them install the necessary infrastructure, which includes the high current or the high power lines. and the transformers that actually power up those lights. It'll also provide for possible future expansion of the river corridor for future developments that might occur as well. So this goes ahead and gets that major work started. There's obviously going to be additional infrastructure improvements as the river continues to develop. We'll address the whitewater course as those power requirements become more well-known, and any other development that might occur in the area. But for us to proceed with the race course lighting, we're asking that you also approve this companion item today so that we can move forward with OG&E and providing the power requirements.
Questions or comments for Eric? Anything from the subcommittee, Michael, or?
No, I move we approve it, approve the resolution as written.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve this recommended resolution. Everyone in favor say aye. Opposed, no. It is approved. Item 14 is the discussion action item on MAS 3 program. Anything under that heading, Eric?
We don't have anything additional today, no.
Anything by members of the subcommittee? All right, then let's move to item 15 on the agenda, and that is, we've heard from many of the subcommittees today, but this is an opportunity for any subcommittee to make a report that has not been previously identified.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to discuss some of the issues that we talked about yesterday at the Trails and Sidewalks report. You recall during the meeting here a few minutes ago that we tabled one of the measures that was brought to be brought before the committee. It wasn't anything that was wrong with the report in itself. It was much like Garver's. However, we had some conversation about the route going from MacArthur, I believe it was MacArthur West down southwest 15th Street, which is a kind of an eyesore area in an industrial area. And we were cutting across that trail rather than following the river in that area because it was believed that the river was a little overgrown and too difficult and maybe be unsafe. In the committee, we actually had some committee members that went out and walked that area and found that has been cleared, or not completely cleared, but is thinned out, and that there is a natural path that has occurred there. So rather than run that from MacArthur over to Crystal Lake along 15th Street, we've asked the contractor to go back and take a look and bring up a proposal to follow the river around in that area, and that's the only reason that report was sent back. The other part of that is, of course, you approved the report for the Phase 1 for the South Council Road portion of the trails. We had an update on the sidewalks master plan. To date, we've taken a look at 290 possible miles for sidewalks. Of course, you'll recall that we've only got money for about 50 miles. So we're continuing to work on a priority and narrow that scope down to try to figure out where would best place to install those sidewalks. And that's it for the Trails and Sidewalks Committee.
Thank you. Kim?
I have a question about that. On those 290 miles that'll be evaluated, would that then be something that might become part of the city's master plan for sidewalks?
You know, there's an ongoing discussion through planning and public works about a comprehensive city master plan, and that's still underway. But I would think any of the recommendations that would come out of the MAPS 3 subcommittee we could easily incorporate. So sidewalks that are identified as maybe priority or upper priorities, I mean, the ones that can't be constructed, we definitely want to utilize that information in the future.
One of the things we did as the subcommittee is we went out to the community and asked them to give us their recommendation on what the priority was for sidewalks. And it was included schools, hospital access, transit access, wheelchair access, and things of this nature. So within that, that's where the 290 miles has come through, with all those things grouped together. So now we're trying to look at those individually to see which ones would be the best. And then once the plan's put together, we can turn that over to the city public works, and they can continue on with that if they wish.
Any other subcommittee want to have comments for the group? All right. Zane?
Yes, sir. Transit Modern Streetcar Subcommittee yesterday, we had an exhaustive meeting again, in which we discussed a number of motions, one of which passed, which would amend the Jacobs A&E contract for them to include the study of a spur along from that would extend from the Santa Fe Station through existing Pacific Rail spur out towards either Midwest City or up to the Adventure Line area, to the zoo. So we believe that there was some discussion whether or not it was within the scope, maybe not from a streetcar standpoint, but certainly from a transportation standpoint. We looked at, so we've asked that we amend the contract for Jacobs to study what it would take to acquire that system, upgrade it, and protect that route corridor for future transit. It's not specifically tied to the streetcar, but it is within the scope of transit.
And if I might just elaborate a little bit, the contract as presented yesterday by David Todd, it's still under negotiation, so we're able to incorporate that additional scope of work without an amendment because it hasn't been completed. I think it's something that staff expects to have done in the next month, and there's been some desire also by certain city council members to do the same. And so this is something that staff picked up on an earlier council meeting that occurred a few weeks ago about the desire to look at what they call the Northeast Corridor. This is that corridor that extends north out of the Santa Fe Station, heads due east across the north part of Bricktown, and then connects to the existing Adventure Line that occurs about 10th Street. And so, but we'll ask Jacobs to do that, to provide some study and some recommendations on that.
Thank you. Michael?
Well, first of all, Tom, let me apologize for sauntering through here a few minutes ago. I had in my mind, in fact, I thought I was 5 minutes early. I had down 10:30, so I apologize to the board and to the staff and guests for just kind of walking through. Obviously, I would have walked through the back if I would have known through the back if I knew I was late. So I really apologize for that. And I don't know if it's been mentioned that there was no senior wellness subcommittee meeting this month. Have you all talked about that, Eric?
We haven't. We have not. We have not.
Okay. So the reason there was not is to kind of reiterate shortly, the RFPs that was submitted to the city for the first wellness center were rejected, both rejected, and we are going to do another RFP. But with the experience and wisdom of Mike Mize and staff and David Todd and others, before that RFP is issued, we have decided that we are going to put a series of meetings together with potential partners that we thought might have been on board earlier on in this process, and even others that have since perhaps have surfaced. And Nicole Franklin has worked so hard in getting those meetings scheduled. And so I hope that at our next board meeting, our next Wellness Center subcommittee meeting, we might have a little bit of more information to provide to the committee as well as to the board. It would seem to me that it probably is going to be a little longer than some would have preferred to get there before that selection is made of that operating partner. But we don't want to go blindly like some of us probably thought we might have done in that first time and get a whole bunch of rejections on the RFP and no interest. We want to prevent that from happening this time, so we want to do our due diligence, of course. Pretty much correct. Is that correct, Eric?
Yes, that's correct. And so, as Mike mentioned, we're going to take some additional time to do a more in-depth review and seek additional comments because we definitely want to make the Wellness Center projects very successful for Oklahoma City.
Kim?
Just a few additional comments on the Park Subcommittee. We did meet yesterday and approve the 2 contracts that we then approved today to move on to council. We had some great discussion about the excitement that we anticipate with our new architect coming on board with the master plan for the park. As one of the things that, in looking through the contract, that not only will we be having actual visits in days or days together from our architect and all their supporting associates, but we will also have the ability in the future to have teleconferencing in our 10th floor conference room, which we were very excited about and just glad that we'll be embracing technology that will further help all of the subcommittees to work with their liaisons that are out of town. I know we're going to be talking about the map that you see above you for the upper park, and we're all getting really excited that we're just about 100% acquired on all the properties, and as promised, we're having a blue cupcake party. But our subcommittee is equally anxious to then begin acquiring property on the South Park and moving forward and getting our shovels out.
Thank you. Any other reports from subcommittees? Dee?
The State Fair, I'm Vice Chairman of the State Fair Subcommittee. We did not meet this month. And on the river, you've heard all the busy work we've been doing, and did want to say that the committee will be getting together to evaluate bids on the Whitewater facility coming up. So,
Great.
thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to remind the staff, when they get to Hargraves and their park study, there is a group sponsored by the Community Foundation that is looking at the whole park system in Oklahoma City. I think it's important we make sure that Hargraves is aware of that fact, and that this group has been meeting for about a couple of months now, and Nancy Anthony is sort of pushing the effort to develop a long-range plan for all the parks in Oklahoma City. So I think it's important that they work together on this thing.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And may I make one other comment? I hate to be a Mr. No kind of thing, but we've got a really favorable report on revenue coming in on MAPS 3. I chaired a group that oversaw MAPS 2.5, which was the arena and the practice facility. And we had a couple of really great months to start with, and then things fell apart. And so we had to do some value engineering and eliminate some things. They were basically behind the scenes kind of things, so the public wouldn't be aware of. But we did make some major changes to adjust to a sharply declining budget, because the MAPS revenues fell off significantly during the period, 1 year that we had that MAPS 2.5 in effect. So it's a cautionary note that these are great times and things look good, but it's a long ways to go to the end. We need to be prepared not to plan to spend this money before we really have it in hand.
Advice well given and well taken.
Call me Dr. North.
All right. Any other reports from subcommittees? If not, then informational items. Eric, you're going to talk to us about the property acquisition for the Upper Park.
Yeah, I don't think that you'll notice a significant change from last month's report, but obviously from about a year and a half ago, almost two now, that we started, from a drawing that was really colored all white with no acquisitions to one that nearly is all dark blue today, and dark blue is that goal of having it fully acquired. We're very close to that goal. You'll notice that the majority of the outstanding parcels are right there just south of the old interstate, what will be the new boulevard. Either portions of those are in condemnations or offers have been made. We're working out some final arrangements with ODOT to secure those parcels. So I would just tell you that it's been very successful. Obviously, the Urban Renewal Authority, who we contracted with to acquire those, with their contractors and services has been very well done, and so we'll continue to report in the future. But we're nearing the end of the Upper Park, and as Kim mentioned, in the coming year or so, we'll start acquiring the Lower Park as well and get it underway.
Great progress. Any questions about that? All right, then let's move to, item 17, could that be? David, we'll call on you for an update on the whole program.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A lot of the things have been covered by the subcommittee reports, but I want to just give you a little more information. As far as the park, the historical structure survey continues. We hope to get answers soon on that as to what structures are significant and what we might save and what might go. The engineering for the utilities is underway. Work order's been written, so the engineer is working to ascertain the issues with the utilities within the parkland, and also, as we just said, that the land acquisition continues. As far as the river, you previously approved 2 starting systems. Those have been ordered. We expect those to be delivered sometime in September. So that'll be good for the racing down there. Also, Whitewater facility consultant interviews are scheduled for July 13th, and I find that really exciting. We can get started on that Whitewater facility. Convention Center site acquisition continues, and the proposals for the conceptual plan consulting services are to be received tomorrow, and then we will go through the consulting process to choose the firm that will help us with that project. Transit work continues with the subcommittee, and we're working on the contract right now with Jacobs to be our consultant and help us with that, and hope to have that to you soon. Sidewalk and trails was mentioned. I think pretty much covered everything in the report. Senior health and wellness, Mr. Dover covered that. Meetings and interviews continue. We're excited about that process, and we'll be reporting to you soon. Fairgrounds work continues on the limited master plan study, and hope to have that to you soon also. I can answer any other questions.
Any other questions for David?
Thank you.
Thank you, David. Appreciate the good work you and your staff are doing for us, keeping us moving. Item 18, comments by the board. I'm just going to mention a couple of brief things. We know that we have an open seat where, because of Rusty's resignation, and that's a work in progress that the mayor and council are definitely have their sights on, and I expect that soon we'll have a new member for that. Again, appreciate everybody pitching in to help during Nathaniel's absence. Also mention that one of the things that will also happened because of Rusty's resignation is that we don't have a chair of the State Fair subcommittee. Dee, you're doing the work there, and that's another item that's under consideration. But we expect, if you think about this Citizens Advisory Board over the course of a decade, we're going to have these kind of things occur, and so having a process in place that addresses them appropriately is what we do have and what is happening. So I'm feeling great about getting all of these things taken care of. And with that, I'd ask if there are any members of the board have additional comments. Staff, Eric or David, anyone else? Well, then we would open it up to citizens who are here. If there are any citizens who would like to be heard by the Citizens Advisory Board, this is your opportunity. If not, then we would move to the last item. Is there a motion to adjourn? Second. It's been moved and seconded that we adjourn. All in favor say aye. We're adjourned.